There we go. So my name is Neil, and I'm working with Jen to facilitate this assembly, and you'll meet her in a moment. We have a tight schedule, and we intend to finish no later than 9:15, so we're going to get started straight away. We plan to have a break of 5 minutes, about halfway, but if anyone feels they need longer, please private message me in the chat, and we'll make it happen for you. We believe the magic of an assembly happens in the breakout room discussions, not here in the main room. So we're going to be as brief as we possibly can here and maximize the time that you have in the breakout rooms. With that in mind, we will try and avoid distractions in the chat by disabling it when it's not required, and we will remove anybody who is disrespectful of our purpose here this evening. We welcome everyone, but not every behavior. Please keep yourself muted when you're not speaking, and please change your screen name, if you wish, to include your first name and where you live, which might be helpful for people. You might find your neighbor sitting on the screen here this evening. And if you have a piece of paper and a pen handy, that'll come in useful too. So let's get started. Here is a brief video describing the flooding is shit problem really well. When we've watched it, we'll go straight into the check-ins and get started with the assembly. Thank you. May we see the video now, please, Ned?
In this talk, I'll give a brief to this short video about deep water and its campaign, Flooding is Shit. In this talk, I'll give a brief introduction to deep water, then how climate change is causing extreme weather events, particularly flooding in the UK, followed by an explanation of how a combined sewer system works, its effects on our waterways, and finally, why flooding is shit. Deep Water began as an outreach group in the Midlands. Its aims are to make the connection between the climate and ecological emergency and more frequent and extreme weather events, and in particular flooding. Deep Water developed a talk which proved so effective they spread across the UK. And then, after a series of campaigns and actions, they began reaching groups internationally. So what is behind our increased and more frequently intense rainfall? Well, the intensity of rainfall depends on how much water the air can hold at any given time. Rising air temperatures increase the evaporation rate, so our oceans release more water vapour into the air, and air can hold up to 7% more moisture for every 1 degree centigrade of temperature rise. So as our temperatures go up, our flooding will get worse. We're now going to watch a short video on recent floods in Germany and around the world.
July 2021. After severe rainfall, the Ahr Valley in western Germany was hit by an enormous flood. Water gushed through the villages, killing over 100 people and damaging thousands of houses. Extreme weather events are occurring more frequently all over the world, not just in Germany. Rising sea levels and heavy rainfall cause devastating floods.
From now on, every day, somewhere in the world, we will have an extreme weather event, unprecedented weather event like we never had before.
This map shows the areas of England that are at risk from river and tidal flooding. Apologies for not being able to show Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales, but we can't find a comparative map. But the key thing to remember is any location with a largely impervious surface, such as an urban area, is at risk from flash flooding. Flooding has always been an occasional part of life in the areas shown on the map, but as you've just heard, experts warn that climate change is worsening the situation. more than 3,400 of England's high consequence flood control measures, in other words, those defined as where there is a high risk to life and property if they fail, were judged to be in such bad condition they were almost useless. And that statement is from the Environment Agency. The most unpredictable and dangerous type of flooding is flash flooding. In the picture on the left, you can see that natural ground cover can allow 25% of rain to sink into the topsoil, 25% into the deep aquifers and water table, 40% evaporates or is drawn into trees and transpired, and only 10% forms runoff and travels to our drainage systems. But in built-up areas shown on the right, where 75 to 100% of the surface is impervious, only 15% is drawn into the ground, 30% evaporates, and 55% will run off. And that's what overwhelms our drainage systems and causes flash floods. Here's a short video showing recent flash flooding in Edinburgh.
Ominous-looking clouds over Glasgow yesterday, and the rain that fell from them caused widespread disruption. In Edinburgh, many streets were flooded. There were tricky journeys for drivers and pedestrians. The train line between Edinburgh Waverley and Haymarket Station had to be closed. St James Quarter Shopping Centre only opened last month. Naturally ventilated, it's deliberately designed to allow some rain to get in, but not this much. Parts had to be cordoned off for safety reasons. Many parts of the UK experienced heavy rainfall yesterday. Sunday shopping, for some, turned out to be a rather soggy experience.
I'll give you a few moments to read this explanation of how a combined sewer system works. Treating wastewater removes about 90% of microplastics. But researchers at the University of Manchester found that the poor management of untreated wastewater and raw sewage by water companies was the main source of microplastic pollution in the UK's rivers. The presence of high levels of microplastics on the riverbed suggested that water companies were also spilling raw effluent during dry spells, which is against UK and EU regulations. And when you add to this industrial, agricultural and urban runoffs, as well as pollution from roads, which contain toxic metals and hydrocarbons found in fuel, and other pollutants washed into water, they all pose a significant threat to river health. Road runoff can carry over 300 pollutants, causing short and long-term damage, including killing fish, and even discolouring water, turning the river water black in areas of heavy traffic. By their own confession, water companies say they dumped untreated sewage into English water bodies more than 400,000 times in 2020, and did the same again last year in 2021. And that totalled about 3.1 million hours of sewage being dumped into rivers. As shocking as that seems, you can safely assume this figure grossly underplays the true picture, because not all sewage discharges are recorded, and because the sector is allowed to self-report its spills. This is a practice that begs to be abused. In the passage of a recent Environment Bill, the House of Lords tried to strengthen proposals for greater control over sewage discharges, but they were defeated in the Commons 268 votes to 204, on the advice of George Eustace, the Environment Secretary. We're now going to watch a short video from Windrush, WASP. WASP stands for Windrush Against Sewage Pollution. The River Windrush is a tributary of the Thames in Gloucestershire. You may wish to adjust your volume as the sound is quite quiet.
If you don't ever have to see sewage fungus, don't bother, because it's disgusting. It's like a kind of grey-brown jelly that coated everything in that brook. It's shocking. What's happened is they've allowed this to degrade over so many years that now the problem is so big. Some people will say it's too big to tackle, and we say it's too big to ignore. The hours that the water companies have been spilling untreated sewage are shocking, and it's been put out to the public that this happens only in rare occasions for short periods of time, and it's an emergency to stop it flooding into their homes. But the reality is it's far more extensive. It's happening in dry weather, and it will be ignored almost every time. The tiny fraction of prosecutions from the huge number of offences means that it's no form of deterrent.
Does somebody not govern this? I mean, it's got to be against the law.
We say it is against the law. The water company wants to argue that point. The Environment Agency says that type of event was against the law, but they're reluctant to go up against the industry. Even 30 years after privatisation, they're still not in control. In fact, the industry is quite clearly now pretty much taken over its own regulation. It's in the industry's interest to cut corners. They call it sweating the assets, and it means you don't fix anything. The industry as a whole, I believe, roughly has made 58 billion since the start of privatisation. Bearing in mind this comes from bill payers, it just looks like an utter failure. People have had enough. They can see it happening. They know that there's something really badly wrong. Something is amiss, and they have to take it into their own hands.
So I have this crazy fear of water.
Okay.
Really, it's a phobia, actually. Big deal for me to get into the Thames. In this day and age, the last thing I ever thought I would need to be fearful for in the Thames was swimming in somebody's poo.
Absolutely. When I was a kid wandering around streams and I was fishing, I was just looking at stuff. We'd come across beautiful places. No one thought to take photographs. No one thought, I better photograph this, one day it's going to be gone, did they? Suddenly, we didn't even see it happening. But you'd go back to places that you went as a kid and think, hang on a minute, what's happened here? Many young people that I meet now that are in the water have never seen it in any other state.
Alex, weren't you saying that you had interviewed a man in his 70s that used, yes, and he used to fly fish when he was younger?
Yeah, when he was my age, when he was 13, 14. On the Windrush. What he said about how the river used to be, how it used to be gin clear, you'd see every pebble on the bottom. What he said about that kind of started to scare me, because I started thinking, okay, what if my generation grows up without realising what it used to be like, and then we'll just grow up and accept that that's how a river is, and this problem will never be fixed.
So if an individual's just at home watching a video, what can they do? I mean, what is the most important thing and the most impactful thing that they can do?
I think the greatest thing they can do is know, because when you get a lot of people that know about this and care enough so that if there's a petition or it becomes a voting issue, that they understand that things aren't great, things are not how they're being portrayed, then they can make their views known to their MPs and their councillors and make this an issue that politicians care about, because then we start to see change. Complain to the water companies and just be aware of your surroundings.
When we all succeed,
Yeah.
can the rivers ever look like they did before.
Well, the great thing about rivers is they're moving. Once you stop polluting a river, you will see recovery quite quickly because you're giving life clean water, and you'll be amazed. People need to understand that life will change really rapidly for the better if you stop killing it, stop polluting it.
That is just one example of what's happening all over the country. So, here is a UK map of water and sewerage companies, and their boundaries are the ones with the white outline. The water-only companies are boundaried in green. The water and sewerage companies are the ones responsible for the combined sewage overflows and the pollution of our rivers and waterways. So, which company do you pay your water rates to destroy our rivers? Over to you.
Thank you, Ned. Welcome back, everybody. I'm sorry if you found that video disturbing. The Deepwater team that put this assembly together includes Linda Kev Cat, who will be note taker here in the main room, Ned, who's doing the tech today, and that was her voice on the video, and our speakers tonight, Simon, Claire, and Jules. Our objective today is to launch a bottom-up movement to tackle the growing problem of untreated sewage, pharmaceuticals, and other nasties being pumped into our waterways, be they rivers, wetlands, lakes, oceans, or even sometimes our streets and homes, which is often caused by flooding, and flooding is only going to get worse. At the end of the assembly, we aim to have got you thinking about what you can do locally and nationally, and what help you might need from the Deepwater team to enable that. We will also get you together with people who live in the same catchment area or water authority area to kickstart forming affinity groups to take your ideas forward. Jen, over to you.
Hi everyone, I'm Jen. It's great to be with you this evening. So now we're going to start with check-ins in breakout rooms. Each breakout room will have 6 to 8 people in it, and this is what we suggest you share with each other. A, your name and where you live. B, what brought you to this People's Assembly. C, how you felt before you got here. And D, how you felt after having seen that video. We'll try and keep the same people in each breakout room for the main breakout room later on. So this is a great opportunity to get to know your new friends and colleagues for the rest of this assembly. Many of you will be familiar with the 3 pillars of an assembly, which are radical inclusivity, active listening, and trust the process. We're going to use them here. So when you get into your room, please make sure you have a facilitator. You should already have one that's volunteered. You also need to elect a note taker. The note taker will be feeding back your thoughts to the main room later, so should be prepared to be recorded. Both the facilitator and the note taker should have a laptop or computer, because you can't really do these important jobs on a phone or an iPad. The facilitator will make sure that everyone has an equal chance to speak uninterrupted and to be heard. This is what radical inclusivity pillar is all about. They will also encourage active listening by using the assembly hand signals that many of you will already be familiar with. So this one's I agree, which is helpful to the note taker, and this one is I want to speak, I have a point. The note taker will be keeping a record of the key points, and we'll put that into the Google Doc. So the link to the Google Doc should be in the chat, and can you just click on it and make sure that you can open it and you can edit it. In that document, you'll see that there are headings for each breakout room, breakout 1, breakout 2, breakout 3, etc. So the note taker is going to remember which breakout room they're in and then just fill in the bit for their section. So that was quite a lot of information. Is everybody clear with all of that? If you've not and you've got any questions, can you please just message into the chat and one of us will answer. Okay, so this breakout room is going to last for 15 minutes, which will give you a minute or two to find your facilitator and note taker, and then about 2 minutes each to answer the suggested questions, which will also be in the chat if you've forgotten what they were. The note taker and facilitator also should have their 2 minutes to contribute, of course. Please leave a couple of minutes at the end to agree 5 words that you all agree describe how you feel after watching those videos. When you come back into the main room, we'll ask the note takers to type their 5 words into the chat and we'll go on from there. Thank you. Again, if you have any questions, please message. If you have any problems or questions when you're actually in your breakout room, please use the button at the bottom of the screen to request one of us to come and join you. But before we go into those breakout rooms, can we just take 1 minute in silence to reflect on what we might want to say about our feelings before and after watching that video?
Tell me when you're ready, Jen.
Okay, thank you and see you in 15 minutes. Thanks, Ned.
Welcome back, everybody. I hope you enjoyed meeting new friends and maybe catching up with old ones. Could I ask each of the note takers, please, to type or copy and paste from their notes into the chat, firstly, their room number, and secondly, the 5 emotions that the group agreed they felt after watching the video, all in a single chat message. And then I'll give you a minute to do that. And thank you, Breakout Room 5. I'll give you a minute to do that, and then I'll ask you all to press enter at the same time. Okay, be rebels, that's fine. I think we're good to go. So please hit enter, all you wonderful note takers. So let's take a minute and have a look at some of the words that people are using to describe their emotions. Yeah. Guilt. Please go easy on yourself. Angry, yes. Alarm, shocked.
Angry is coming up a lot, isn't it?
Yeah. discuss it.
What are you looking at to read?
We're looking at the chat. We're looking at the chat. That's where people have typed in their feedback from the first breakout room. So, well, wow. I think the conclusion is that there is a need for urgent action. So on that subject, we're now going to hear from 3 speakers who are going to talk for 5 minutes each on the general topic of what can be done. First up is Simon, and I'll introduce the others after Simon has spoken. Simon has been monitoring river water quality, and its impact on riverine systems generally for several decades. He has valuable insight to share on how the water utilities work and don't work. Welcome, Simon, and thank you. If you'd like to unmute, you have the microphone for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good to see you all here. I'm going to launch straight in, share my screen. 5 minutes isn't very long to get to the bottom of this. So let's see. Can you all see my screen now? How are we doing? Cool. So as Neil said, I've worked for West Country Rivers Trust now for 7 years. It's an environmental charity based in the West Country. I have worked before that with the Environment Agency for 10 years or so in monitoring research. So I've come across, I've acquired a bit of knowledge over the years. The first thing I'd like to say, and I say this to anyone I come into touch with really, is that we don't think of rivers as linear features. Rivers are all around us. We're interacting with rivers every time we turn on the tap, every time we flush the loo. The decisions we make about what we cover our garden in, it all has an impact on the rivers. This is a rivers map showing all the main rivers in the UK. My stomping ground is the West Country, so I have a more highly detailed map of that. And it just goes to show you're never far away from a stream or a river. So what you do in your life has an impact on the rivers. One of the things I thought about how to kind of convey this in 5 minutes was, this is the CO2 concentrations, which is a graph I'm sure we're all very aware of. I looked at that graph and I thought, you know what? I reckon you could flip that graph and it would help, it would pretty much reflect the way our rivers have developed, if you like, or have deteriorated over the last 200 or 300 years. So I had a go. And I've stretched this timescale, so we're looking at the last 500 years or so. And basically everything that we do, everything we've done, and a lot of the things we've done in those last few hundred years to get us to the point we are with the climate emergency and the biodiversity kind of catastrophe will have an impact on the rivers. Everything from, from starting the Industrial Revolution, the way our water bodies were used for power, they were altered, they were dammed, they were, mills were extracting water, and maybe we got away with it in the early days when there weren't very many of us. We started draining farmland. So this has completely altered the hydrology so that now rivers don't drain as they should. They're much flashier. Water runs into them much quicker and runs out of them again much quicker too. So we have rivers now with no gravels left in the bottom because that's all gone. It's being lost fast and it's being replaced. Reservoirs the same. They cut off the supply of gravels entering those river systems, completely changing the behaviour. This is long before climate change was starting to become a problem. Everything from the way we use cars everywhere, roads, the drainage off roads, the pollution that comes off roads. It was mentioned in the video there. Of course, chemical fertilizers came along not long after and really altered the chemical composition of our rivers, really altered the ecological balance of our river systems. Pesticide use is absolutely everywhere now. People spraying healthy crops with glyphosate just to dry them out so they can harvest them quicker and easier. Tractors compacting soil, again, it's just one thing after another that's led us to where we are. Sewage treatment plants. So before the sort of 1940s, 1950s, it was a very small kind of thing. Sewage treatment plants, it was basically just a discharge, chuck the raw shit into the river. Again, we could maybe get away with it then, but the point is now it's not just crap in the water, it's all sorts of chemicals, pharmaceuticals, industrial chemicals, and those systems are still basically left over from the 50s and 60s. Treatment technology has not moved on an awful lot. Antibiotics now are commonplace in animal farming. Motorways started to come in and really accelerate that interface between runoff and drainage and pollutions, fast tracking them into our rivers all over the country, and pharmaceuticals that we're now using every day, you know, in our homes. It's all connected. So again, our sewage treatment system is not designed to take those out of the water. And finally, then the one we received the news the other day that every single water body in the country now fails for chemical status. And this is because of things like flame retardants that were put into our furniture 20 odd years ago. They've been banned since, but in many cases, they will still reside in our rivers for 40, 50 years because they're bioaccumulative. So this last slide then is the breakdown. This is from the Environment Agency's data. It sort of highlights exactly how riddled our system is with things that are damaging our rivers. And this is roughly the percentage of reasons why water bodies are failing the Water Framework Directive. So you can see the highest one there is treated sewage. So there's a lot of attention on storm overflows, which is untreated sewage, but actually the treated sewage, such as it is actually what's killing most of our rivers. And I think that is astonishing. That's something that I've recently come across that data. So I don't know how I'm doing on the 5 minutes. Probably about there, am I?
You've got a minute left, Simon.
A minute left, cool. So essentially, the point is, our system, the system that we've evolved over the last 200 years is completely ill-prepared to deal with the sort of impact of climate change, which exacerbates a lot of these things, you know, with the increased flooding, the overwhelming of sewage systems. But our rivers were already in a really terrible state because we'd arrived at that point where we've outgrown our ability to cope with the numbers of people. You know, all these systems were designed for 1/10 of the population we have now, and they just can't cope with who we have now. The water companies are allowed to monitor their own sewage. They test for a very small number of chemicals very infrequently. You know, typically 4 times a year, at most 24 times a year, and even then for maybe 3 or 4 things where there's absolutely hundreds of chemicals in that stuff. So we've got a long way to go, I think.
Simon, thank you. And thank you for the work that you do on a daily basis. What I heard you saying is that everything's connected. We all impact rivers with everything that we do. The treatment tech hasn't moved on from the 60s. By the way, the global population has trebled since 1950. It's not designed to take out modern chemicals. And I heard the horrible word bioaccumulative. But I think people listening were hearing some of the things that we need to focus on in our activity, which is the pace and frequency of testing. So thank you, Simon. Our next speaker is Claire. Claire lives in Shrewsbury, near the Severn, finding more and more sewage on the footpath next to the river, and being a bit of an activist, she decided to do something about it and formed a group called Up Sewage Creek. And she's now going to tell us her story. Claire, welcome and thank you. Please unmute, and you have the microphone for 5 minutes.
Hello. Yeah, so I've got dogs, and I walked down by the footpath by the river, and I just sort of increasingly started to notice that there was poo on more and more occasions. We've lived here 16 years, and it's definitely been getting worse. And one time as well, last summer, when it hadn't even been raining very much, we had just had very intense rain, so talking about climate change and everything sort of mounting up, and this particular CSO, it doesn't even successfully get to the river to overflow. It's got the manhole covers splurge, and it's literally a footpath, and it's got a little municipal park, and loads of people use that footpath to go to and from town. So, and I've been complaining about it for several years to Severn Trent, and nothing was done. They didn't even clean up half the time. So in the summer, I called on my friend and suggested we do something, and around the same time, a man knocked on my door looking for the Green Group, and so we what we did was we booked a local hall, we flyered the whole area. I live in quite a discreet area. We flyered the whole area and we got about 50 people to come down. And so we had, first half of the meeting was information, kind of very like this meeting actually, information based. And the second half of the meeting was a people's assembly where we split everyone into 4 groups and asked people what they thought we should do. And then kind of from there, we've actually, and then a couple of weeks after that, we had a march where we got 100 people walking through Shrewsbury. And you can have quite a lot of fun with poo, actually. We had Poonami posters and we had poo hats, like someone's made, Kate has made hats out of old tights that kind of curl up into a turd shape on the top of your head. So we had fish heads. We had quite a lot of fun and made quite a lot of noise. And we got some letters to Severn Trent and some letters for the MP who, interestingly, the day of that first meeting, the MP was the day the MP voted against the Lord's amendment. So we were able to call him out on that. But actually since then, so we've got a lot of people going. I mean, for me personally, my personal journey, I knew things were bad, but that's why I found things are much, much worse than I had actually thought. And the situation is much more urgent. But what fills me with hope is that it's kind of the zeitgeist of the moment. Everyone's talking about it, even in the not the Financial Times, the Telegraph the other day, it was front page news that the water companies have been taking too much money. So I actually think, for me, it's like if you look at cannabis as an entry-level drug for harder drugs, then I kind of see that sewage is like it kind of radicalized people to more environmental action, because everyone seems to understand that putting poo in the rivers is not a good idea. And then of course and then you can raise awareness about the chicken poo and the dog flea treatments and the processed effluent I just found out about. So I mean, as a result of our campaign, we're sort of thinking about running these kind of community meetings up and down the Severn, maybe from the source to the sea, so communities along the Severn could have a community meeting, well, like we're having here, but actually very much rooted in that local community. So we're having our next one in Iron Bridge tomorrow, I think, actually. So we're having, so Kevin, who helped organise this, we're doing that tomorrow, so hopefully we'll have a good turnout there. And we've actually had a meeting with the MP who's now thinking, oh, this one might be a vote winner for me, and oh my goodness, I really need some vote winners right now. So actually I mean, we don't trust him as far as we can throw him, obviously, but at the same time, he's offering to ask questions in the House. The council are actually saying they want to put pressure on Severn Trent now. They hadn't realised how bad it was, and they're thanking us for drawing it to the situations their attention. We're going to have a big meeting in May, hopefully, with the council, a big meeting with the council and everything to see what we can do. So I do, and I mean, there's so much going on in the press every day that I can't even keep up. Most of it is saying how bad things are, but we've got to go from here to seeing what we can do. And I mean, whilst the water companies obviously are to blame and the government, they're probably not going to do as much as they should, and we're all going to have to play our part and possibly stop paying half our water bills very soon. And I think that's my 5 minutes. But yeah, all is not lost. I think together we can sort it out, but we've got to sort it out now.
Claire, that was brilliant. 4 minutes and 59 seconds.
Yes.
My deep thanks. Claire, what I heard from you there is actually that there are a lot of friends out there that we can work with. I don't think you were suggesting the Telegraph would be a friend, but people get it and people respond, and you've worked with those people. And I think that is very hopeful. And I love your source to the sea. What a great theme. What a nice alliteration. And clearly at the political level, it's a vote swinger. So thank you for your story, which I think is an inspiration. Our next speaker is Jules. Jules is a long-time rebel activist in XR, including in roles in digital and political circles. He's going to remind us about the different campaigns and actions that we've used successfully in XR in the past, which could well be relevant to us in flooding is shit. Welcome, Jules, and thank you. If you unmute, you have the microphone for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thanks, Neil. So water is life. As humans, we're 60% water and we die within 3 days of not having it. And access to clean, fresh water should be a human right. And yet there are systemic issues with an unrestricted capitalist system that allows companies like Nestle to privatize it around the world. So we get too much or too little water and it's a problem. And drought and floods are the outcomes we're facing, as we know, from catastrophic climate change. So these are the things that the world is already suffering. And in the UK, our water companies are privately owned. They have a monopoly of supply in their area, and they're often owned by capital. So they're owned by institutional investors like banks. So UBS and JP Morgan. And these companies are not acting in our interests, and instead are only interested in profit. And these are the banks that we bailed out in 2012, and they're literally pumping shit into our water. And it's catastrophic and upsetting to hear that 100% of our rivers fail the chemical test and 86% fail the ecological test. So we've got to act now. And if you told me 5 years ago I'd be standing here talking about climate action, I wouldn't have believed you, because I've had 25 years in business as a managing director, and I read the IPCC report and the conclusions are terrifying. And we've just been told that the UN has declared code red for humanity. So what are we going to do about it? Well, water's really close to my heart. I'm also managing director of a community benefits society in Norfolk, and the 10 acres of our land borders the Little Ouse River, which is the border between Norfolk and Suffolk. And we're surrounded by farmlands. So the chemical runoff, we've heard about glyphosate and similar, the nitrates and what have you, all of this is killing our ecology in our rivers, and clean water is really important. So I'm wondering what we can do, because we've got our water companies in private hands that have a monopoly. Since they've been privatized, bills have increased by 40%. They make about 1.8 billion a year from us, and that's 57 odd billion, 58 billion in one of the other videos. And one clear cost is their failure to upgrade their sewer system that regularly overflows into watercourses, polluting rivers and killing wildlife. So Southern Water in July 21 pleaded guilty to knowingly allowing poisonous, noxious or polluting matter or raw sewage to enter coastal waters. And in his judgment, Mr. Justice Johnson said the company was fined 90 million, which is just the cost of doing business for them, had discharged between 16 and 21 billion litres of raw sewage into some of the most precious and delicate ecosystems and coastlines, with a disregard for human health and for fisheries and other legitimate businesses. So these floods are floods which are only going to increase due to climate change and now are going to be full of sewage. So too much water or not enough. You know, we've got flooding in Brussels, London, Germany. We've got many hospitals and 5 million homes in the UK built on floodplains, and the average cost of restoration is 30,000. So that's an annual liability to us, the taxpayer, of 150 billion. So we can't afford not to act. And water is precious. And with not enough water as well, Sir James Bevan, the chief executive of the Environment Agency, said we're approaching the jaws of death, where demand outstrips supply, and we're approaching day zero for London in the next 5 years. So the final bit for me is a quote from Sir James Bevan, who was the chief executive of the Environment Agency in 2019. He said, climate change plus growth is an existential threat to our economy, our environment, our security, our happiness, and our way of life. And we can choose to ignore this problem, or we can choose to tackle it. And I'm betting that you're all in this room because you think the second approach is preferable to the first. So we're going to go into breakout rooms and consider some things, maybe not paying our utility bills, as Claire mentioned. We can try and influence the outcome of the environment bill and policy formation. We could try and break the monopolies and enable us to change water suppliers, or break the privatization and actually make it public again, because this is a story of extractive capitalism and the commons. And the commons is the cultural and natural resources accessible to all members of a society, including natural materials such as air, water, and a habitable earth. And we want clean water.
5 minutes.
So, there we go. So make it a political question and get out there for the elections.
Jules, thank you very much indeed. I heard two messages strongly there. One is the financial motivation of the companies, and that therefore would be a pressure point for them, and the political side as well. So I think that's going to help a lot as we move forward into the discussion phase. So thank you, speakers, very much. Assemblies generally are built on 3 progressive phases, and this assembly is no exception. The first phase is called the input or information phase, and that's what we've just completed with the video and these expert speakers. The second phase is called the deliberation or discussion phase, which is what we're going to do next in breakout rooms. And the final phase is called the integration or feedback phase, which we will get to after the breakout rooms. However, we're about halfway now, so it seems a good time to take a break, which will be for 5 minutes of leg stretching, tea brewing, or whatever. When we come back, we'll go straight into our original breakout rooms with the same people in them, although there may have been some changes due to some people maybe having to leave early, or others arriving after the first breakout room. And then we're going to start to share ideas on what might be a suitable game plan in your area. And importantly, what resources you would need but don't currently have. So please give some thought to that, to those 2 questions during the break. And we'll see you back here at 13 minutes past. Thank you very much.